The Louisiana heat pressed down on Magnolia Grove Plantation like a suffocating blanket, but Eleanor Whitmore barely noticed as she stood on the wraparound porch of the grand white mansion. Her black mourning dress clung to her slender frame, a stark contrast against the peeling paint of the columns that had once been her husband's pride. 6 months had passed since Charles Whitmore's sudden death from fever, leaving Eleanor, at 28, to manage the sprawling cotton plantation alone. The overseer, Mr. Briggs, handled the day-to-day operations, but the weight of decisions and debts fell squarely on her shoulders. "Mrs. Whitmore," came a gentle voice from behind her. Eleanor turned to see Samuel approaching with a glass of sweet tea, his movements careful and measured. At 32, he was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark skin glistening with perspiration from the morning's work. Unlike the other enslaved workers, Samuel could read and write, a skill Charles had allowed him to develop to help with plantation records. "Thank you, Samuel," Eleanor said softly, accepting the glass. Their fingers brushed for the briefest moment, sending a familiar warmth through her chest. "The cotton's coming in well this season," Samuel reported, his voice low and educated. "Mr. Briggs says we might exceed last year's yield." Eleanor nodded, but her attention was drawn to the dust cloud rising from the main road. A carriage was approaching, the ornate black vehicle belonging to Reverend Morrison from the Baptist church in town. "You should go," Eleanor whispered urgently to Samuel. "Quickly!" Samuel's jaw tightened, but he obeyed, disappearing around the side of the house just as the Reverend's carriage pulled up the circular drive. Reverend Morrison emerged, a thin man with sharp features and cold grey eyes. Behind him stepped Mrs. Catherine Beaumont, the town's most influential socialite and notorious gossip. "Eleanor, dear," Mrs. Beaumont called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she climbed the porch steps. "How are you managing, you poor thing?" "I'm well, thank you," Eleanor replied, forcing a smile. "Reverend Morrison, Mrs. Beaumont, what brings you to Magnolia Grove?" The Reverend's expression was grave. "Eleanor, we need to discuss some concerning reports that have reached our ears." Eleanor's blood ran cold, but she maintained her composure. "Reports?" Mrs. Beaumont leaned forward conspiratorially. "There's been talk, dear, about you and one of your workers. People are saying they've seen you together at odd hours, speaking in ways that aren't appropriate." "I don't know what you mean," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "Eleanor," Reverend Morrison interjected, his tone stern, "your reputation and your soul are at stake here. If there's any truth to these whispers, you must put an end to it immediately. The community is watching and they won't tolerate such impropriety." Mrs. Beaumont nodded vigorously. "Think of your late husband's memory, dear. Think of your standing in society. These rumors could destroy everything Charles worked to build." After they left, Eleanor retreated to her bedroom, her hands shaking as she poured herself a glass of brandy. Through her window, she could see Samuel working in the fields, his shirt off in the oppressive heat. Even from this distance, she could make out the scars on his back, reminders of the brutal world they lived in. That night, after the other workers had retired to their quarters, Samuel came to the house through the kitchen entrance, as he had done so many times before. Eleanor was waiting in the parlor, her face pale in the lamplight. "They know," she whispered as he entered. Samuel's expression darkened. "What did they say?" "Reverend Morrison and Mrs. Beaumont came today. There are rumors, Samuel. People are talking about us." Samuel moved closer, his voice urgent. "Eleanor, we can leave. I've been saving money from the extra work I do in town. We could go north to a place where—" "And live as what?" Eleanor interrupted, her voice breaking. "A white woman and a runaway slave. They'd hunt us down, Samuel. They'd kill you and destroy me." "Then what are you saying?" Eleanor couldn't meet his eyes. "I don't know. I need time to think." Samuel reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Eleanor, look at me. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. I love you." "And I love you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But love might not be enough. As Samuel left that night, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the slave quarters. Jeremiah, one of the field hands who had always resented Samuel's privileged position in the house. The next morning, Eleanor found a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was crude, but the message was clear. "We know about you and the houseboy. Pay us $500, or everyone will know." Eleanor's hands trembled as she read the words. $500 was a fortune, money she didn't have with the plantation's mounting debts. But more terrifying was the realization that their secret was no longer safe. Standing at her bedroom window, watching Samuel work in the fields below, Eleanor felt the walls of her world closing in. The whispers had begun, and in the rigid society of 1850s Louisiana, whispers had a way of becoming shouts that could destroy everything in their path. The weight of her decision pressed down on her like the oppressive southern heat, and Eleanor Whitmore realized that the life she had built and the love she had found was about to crumble beneath the crushing force of social expectations and racial hatred. 3 days had passed since the anonymous note arrived, and Eleanor had barely slept. She sat in Charles's old study, surrounded by ledgers and bills that painted a grim picture of Magnolia Grove's finances. The plantation was drowning in debt, and now she faced the impossible choice between financial ruin and social destruction. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she saw a well-dressed stranger. A man in his 50s with calculating eyes and a gold pocket watch chain glinting in the morning sun. "Mrs. Whitmore," the man said when she answered the door, tipping his hat. "I'm Marcus Thornfield, a trader from New Orleans. I understand you might be looking to liquidate some assets." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Word traveled fast in their small community, and traders like Thornfield were always circling plantations in financial distress like vultures. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Thornfield." "Come now, Mrs. Whitmore. A young widow mounting debts and rumors swirling about improper conduct. I'm here to offer you a solution." His smile was cold and predatory. "I'm prepared to pay top dollar for your problem." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The house slave, Samuel. I've heard he's educated, strong, and in his prime. I have buyers in Mississippi who would pay handsomely for such a specimen. Enough to clear your debts and silence any unpleasant gossip." The word specimen made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Get off my property." Thornfield's expression didn't change. "Think carefully, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll be at the Riverside Inn until tomorrow evening. After that, my offer expires, and you'll be left to face the consequences of your choices alone." That afternoon, Eleanor found herself walking through the cotton fields, ostensibly checking on the harvest, but really seeking Samuel. She found him near the irrigation channels, directing a group of workers in repairing a damaged levee. "Samuel," she called softly. He looked up, immediately sensing her distress. "Oh, what's wrong?" "Walk with me," she said, glancing around to ensure they weren't being watched. They moved toward a grove of ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss, far from prying eyes. Eleanor's hands shook as she told him about Thornfield's visit. "He wants to buy you," she whispered, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. Samuel's face hardened. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him to leave, but Samuel, the debts are crushing us, and these rumors, they're getting worse. Mrs. Patterson from the neighboring plantation stopped speaking to me at church yesterday. People are watching us, waiting for proof." "So you're considering it?" His voice was flat, emotionless. "No, I would never." Eleanor stopped, seeing the pain in his eyes. "Samuel, I don't know what to do. If we're discovered, they'll kill you. If I can't pay the debts, I'll lose everything Charles built." "And if you sell me?" Eleanor couldn't answer. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "There's something else," Samuel said quietly. "Jeremiah's been asking questions about us. He's been watching the house at night, and yesterday he asked me directly about my special duties." for the mistress. Eleanor felt the world spinning around her. He's the one who sent the note. Probably. And if we don't give him what he wants, he'll go to the authorities, or worse, to the vigilantes. That evening, Eleanor sat alone in the parlor, staring at a daguerreotype of Charles on their wedding day. He had been a kind man, relatively speaking. He'd never beaten his slaves and had allowed Samuel to learn to read, but he'd also been a product of his time and place, never questioning the system that made their wealth possible. "What would you do, Charles?" she whispered to the photograph. A soft knock at the back door interrupted her thoughts. Samuel entered quietly, his face grave. "I've been thinking," he said, sitting across from her. "Maybe Thornfield's offer is the answer." "Samuel, no, listen to me," he interrupted. "If I'm sold to Mississippi, the rumors die. You keep the plantation, pay your debts, and maintain your position in society. And you," Eleanor's voice broke, "what happens to you?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "I survive. I've done it before. This is different. You don't know what kind of master you'd get, what kind of work." "I know exactly what kind," Samuel said harshly. "But Eleanor, if we continue this way, we'll both be destroyed. At least this way, one of us has a chance at a life." Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "There has to be another way." "What way? We can't run. They'd catch us before we reach the state line. We can't stay. The pressure is only going to increase. And we can't marry, not in this world." The brutal truth of his words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. In the rigid hierarchy of the antebellum South, their love was not just forbidden, it was a crime punishable by death. "I won't do it," she said firmly. "I won't sell you like property." Samuel moved behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You wouldn't be selling me, Eleanor. You'd be saving us both." "How can you say that?" "Because I love you enough to want you to survive this, even if I can't." Eleanor turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "And I love you too much to let you go." They held each other in the lamplight, both knowing that their time was running out. Outside, the Louisiana night was filled with the sounds of crickets and distant thunder, as if the very sky was warning of the storm to come. The next morning brought another note, this one more explicit. "We saw you together last night. $500 by Sunday, or the whole county will know about the widow and her slave lover." Eleanor stared at the crude handwriting, her hands trembling. Sunday was 3 days away. 3 days to find money she didn't have, or to make a choice that would haunt her forever. As she watched Samuel working in the fields, Eleanor realized that love, no matter how pure or deep, might not be enough to overcome the brutal realities of their world. The devil's bargain was becoming less of a choice and more of an inevitability, and the weight of that knowledge was slowly crushing her soul. Sunday morning arrived with an oppressive humidity that made breathing feel like drowning. Eleanor sat in the front pew of Riverside Baptist Church, acutely aware of the whispers and sideways glances from the congregation behind her. Reverend Morrison's sermon about moral purity felt like a personal attack, each word a dagger aimed at her heart. "Sin," the Reverend intoned from the pulpit, his voice echoing off the wooden walls, "has a way of revealing itself. Like a cancer, it spreads until it consumes not just the sinner, but all those around them." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white against the black fabric of her dress. She could feel Mrs. Beaumont's eyes boring into the back of her head, could hear the subtle murmurs of disapproval from the other plantation wives. After the service, Eleanor was approached by Judge Harrison, a portly man with a grey beard and cold, calculating eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his position, "I trust you're managing well in these trying times." "Yes, Judge Harrison, thank you for your concern. I've heard some troubling reports," he continued, lowering his voice. "Reports that suggest you might need guidance in managing your household affairs." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do. the judge replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. Perhaps it's time to consider appointing a male relative to oversee the plantation's operations. For your own protection, of course. The threat was clear. If Eleanor didn't address the rumors herself, the community would step in and strip her of all control. She would become a prisoner in her own home, dependent on the charity of men who saw her as nothing more than a wayward woman in need of correction. That afternoon, Eleanor found herself standing outside the Riverside Inn, her heart pounding as she stared at the building where Marcus Thornfield waited. The decision she had been avoiding for days could no longer be postponed. Inside, Thornfield sat in the hotel's small parlor, sipping whiskey and reading a newspaper. He looked up as Eleanor entered, his predatory smile returning. "Mrs. Whitmore, I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." "I want to discuss your proposal," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excellent. Please, sit." Thornfield gestured to a chair across from him. "I can offer you $800 for the slave Samuel. That should more than cover your immediate debts and provide some cushion for the future." $800. It was more money than Eleanor had seen in months, enough to save Magnolia Grove and secure her position in society. It was also the price of the man she loved. "Where would you take him?" she asked. "I have a buyer in Natchez, a cotton plantation owner who specializes in difficult cases. He has methods for breaking in slaves who've gotten above their station." Eleanor's stomach lurched at the implication. "What kind of methods?" Thornfield's smile widened. "Nothing that concerns you, Mrs. Whitmore. Once the sale is complete, Samuel becomes someone else's responsibility. You'll never have to think about him again." But Eleanor knew she would think about him every day for the rest of her life. "I need time to consider." "Time is a luxury you don't have," Thornfield interrupted. "I leave tomorrow morning, and I won't be back this way for months. This is your only chance to solve your problems cleanly." That evening, Eleanor walked through the plantation grounds one last time with Samuel. They moved in silence through the cotton fields, past the slave quarters, and down to the banks of the Mississippi River. The setting sun painted the water blood red, and the air was thick with the scent of magnolia blossoms. "I met with Thornfield today," Eleanor said finally. Samuel stopped walking, his shoulders tensing. "And?" "He's offering $800. Enough to pay off the debts and silence the rumors." "And his buyer?" Eleanor couldn't meet his eyes. "A plantation in Natchez. He says the owner specializes in disciplining slaves who've overstepped their bounds." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the river. "So it's decided then?" "No," Eleanor said quickly. "Nothing's decided. We could still run, Samuel. We could leave tonight, head north, and live as fugitives for the rest of our lives. Eleanor, be realistic. They'd catch us within a week, and then..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what happened to runaway slaves and the white women who helped them. "There has to be another way." Samuel turned to face her, his eyes filled with a sadness that broke her heart. "Sometimes love means making the hardest choice, not the one that makes us happy. Don't ask me to do this." "I'm not asking," Samuel said gently. "I'm telling you that if you don't, we'll both be destroyed. At least this way you survive." "What kind of survival is that? Living with the knowledge that I sold the man I loved to save my own reputation?" "The kind that keeps you alive," Samuel replied. "Eleanor, I've seen what happens to white women who cross these lines. They end up in asylums or worse. I won't let that happen to you." They stood together on the riverbank as darkness fell, holding each other as if they could stop time itself. But time, like the Mississippi River beside them, flowed inexorably forward, carrying them toward a future neither wanted but both knew was inevitable. "If I do this," Eleanor whispered, "how do I live with myself?" "The same way I'll live with being sold," Samuel replied. "One day at a time, holding on to the memory of what we had." The next morning, Eleanor stood in her study, staring at the bill of sale Thornfield had prepared. The document was simple, clinical in its language. One Negro male, age 32, named Samuel, sold for the sum of $800. 32 years of life, reduced to a single line on a piece of paper. Samuel stood beside her, dressed in his best clothes, a white shirt and dark trousers that Eleanor had given him for Christmas. His face was composed, but she could see the fear in his eyes. "You don't have to watch," he said quietly. "Yes, I do," Eleanor replied. "If I'm going to do this terrible thing, I'm going to face it." Thornfield entered the study with two other men, rough-looking individuals who would escort Samuel to his new owner. The trader's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he saw the signed bill of sale. "Excellent, Mrs. Whitmore. A wise decision." He counted out $800 in gold coins, the metal clinking softly as it hit the desk. "The transaction is complete." One of Thornfield's men stepped forward with iron shackles. "Time to go, boy." "That's not necessary," Eleanor said quickly. "He won't run." "Standard procedure, ma'am," the man replied, fastening the shackles around Samuel's wrists. The sound of the metal clicking shut was the most horrible thing Eleanor had ever heard. Samuel looked at her one last time, his eyes conveying everything they couldn't say aloud. "I love you," he mouthed silently. "I love you too," she whispered back, tears streaming down her face. And then he was gone, led away like a piece of property, while Eleanor stood alone in her study, surrounded by the gold coins that had bought her freedom and cost her soul. The point of no return had been crossed, and Eleanor Whitmore realized that some choices once made could never be undone. 3 months had passed since Samuel's departure, and Eleanor had tried to convince herself that life was returning to normal. The debts were paid, the rumors had quieted, and Magnolia Grove was operating smoothly under Mr. Briggs' management. But normalcy, Eleanor discovered, was a thin veneer that barely concealed the rot beneath. She had thrown herself into the social obligations expected of a plantation widow, attending church functions, hosting tea parties for the local ladies, and maintaining correspondence with potential suitors that Judge Harrison had begun suggesting. On the surface, Eleanor Whitmore appeared to be the picture of Southern propriety, but at night, alone in her bedroom, she was haunted by dreams of Samuel in chains, of his eyes as he was led away, of the sound of shackles closing around his wrists. She had begun drinking more heavily, finding that bourbon was the only thing that could quiet the voices in her head. On a humid Tuesday morning in September, Eleanor was reviewing the plantation's accounts when Mr. Briggs knocked on her study door. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's a man here to see you. Says he has news about Samuel." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "What kind of news?" "He wouldn't say, ma'am. Just that it was important you hear it." The man waiting in the parlor was thin and weathered, with the look of someone who had traveled hard roads. He introduced himself as Thomas Mitchell, a traveling preacher who ministered to slaves on plantations throughout Mississippi and Louisiana. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice gentle but grave, "I've come from the Blackwood plantation in Natchez. I believe you knew a man named Samuel who was recently sold there." Eleanor's hands began to tremble. "Yes. What news do you have?" Reverend Mitchell's expression was pained. "Ma'am, I'm afraid Samuel is dead." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She gripped the arm of her chair to keep from falling. "Dead? How?" The official cause was listed as fever, but Mitchell hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore, I feel compelled to tell you the truth, though it brings me no joy. Tell me." "Samuel was worked to death. Blackwood is known for his cruelty, particularly towards slaves he considers uppity. When Samuel arrived, he was immediately marked as a troublemaker because of his education and refined manner." Eleanor felt the room spinning around her. "What happened?" "Blackwood put him in the fields, doing the hardest labor, clearing swampland, working 18-hour days in the heat. When Samuel tried to use his reading skills to help other slaves, Blackwood had him whipped. When he was caught teaching a child to write his name, the punishment was severe. Mitchell paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. Mrs. Whitmore, Samuel lasted 6 weeks. In his final days, he was delirious with fever, but he kept calling out a name. Eleanor. He said he forgave Eleanor, that she had no choice. Eleanor doubled over as if she'd been struck, a keening wail escaping her lips. The careful composure she had maintained for months shattered completely. "There's more," Mitchell continued gently. "Before he died, Samuel asked me to deliver a message if I ever found you. He said to tell you that he understood why you did what you did, and that he didn't want you to carry the guilt. He said his love for you was the only thing that kept him going." Eleanor was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "I killed him. I killed the only man I ever loved. Mrs. Whitmore, I sold him to save my reputation, and I killed him." Eleanor's voice rose to a scream. "He's dead because I was too much of a coward to face the consequences of loving him." Mitchell reached out to comfort her, but Eleanor recoiled. "Don't touch me. I'm a murderer. I'm worse than a murderer. I'm a woman who sold her lover to save her social standing." After Mitchell left, Eleanor locked herself in her study and drank until the bottle was empty. When Mr. Briggs came to check on her, he found her on the floor, clutching the bill of sale that had sealed Samuel's fate. $800, she kept repeating. "I sold him for $800. The news of Samuel's death spread through the slave quarters like wildfire. Eleanor could see it in the eyes of the workers, the fear, the anger, the knowledge that their mistress was capable of selling any of them to their deaths. The careful balance that had existed on the plantation was shattered. Jeremiah, the field hand who had blackmailed Eleanor, approached her one evening as she sat on the porch, drunk and disheveled. "Heard about Samuel," he said, his voice lacking any sympathy. "Shame what happened to him." Eleanor looked up at him with bloodshot eyes. "You did this. Your blackmail forced me to sell him," Jeremiah shrugged. "You made your choice, Mrs. Could have chosen different." "Get away from me," Eleanor whispered. "Just wanted you to know," Jeremiah continued, "that I got more information now about other things. Other secrets might be worth something to the right people." Eleanor stared at him, realizing that the nightmare was far from over. Jeremiah had tasted power, and he wasn't going to stop. She was trapped in a web of her own making, and every struggle only made it tighter. That night, Eleanor sat in Samuel's old room above the kitchen, a space she had never entered while he was alive, but now found herself drawn to obsessively. She had discovered his few possessions, a worn Bible, a small wooden carving of a bird, and hidden beneath a loose floorboard, letters he had written but never sent. The letters were addressed to a sister in Virginia, telling her about his life on the plantation, about learning to read, about finding love in an impossible place. In the final letter, dated just days before his sale, Samuel had written, "Dear Sarah, I may not see you again in this life, but I want you to know that I found something beautiful here, even in the midst of all this ugliness. Her name is Eleanor, and she loves me as I love her. I know the world says our love is wrong, but it feels like the only right thing in a world gone mad. If something happens to me, don't hate her. She's trapped just like we are, only in a different kind of chains." Eleanor clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing until she had no tears left. Samuel had understood, even at the end, that they were both victims of a system that made their love impossible, but understanding didn't ease the guilt that was eating her alive. As dawn broke over Magnolia Grove, Eleanor made a decision. She couldn't bring Samuel back, couldn't undo the choice that had led to his death, but she could ensure that his death meant something. She could find a way to honor his memory, even if it destroyed her in the process. The truth of what she had done and what it had cost was finally clear. Now she had to decide what to do with that knowledge and whether redemption was possible for someone who had sold her soul for social acceptance. Winter came early to Louisiana that year, bringing with it a cold that seemed to seep into Eleanor's bones and never leave. The months following the news of Samuel's death had transformed her from a respected plantation widow into a hollow-eyed specter who wandered the halls of Magnolia Grove like a ghost haunting her own life. The plantation was falling apart around her. Without Samuel's quiet efficiency and Mr. Briggs's growing concern about Eleanor's mental state, the daily operations had become chaotic. Workers whispered among themselves about the mistress, who talked to empty rooms and screamed at shadows. Several had run away, preferring the dangers of flight to the unpredictability of their increasingly unstable owner. Eleanor had stopped attending church after an incident where she had stood up during Reverend Morrison's sermon and accused him of being a hypocrite who preached love while supporting a system built on human bondage. The congregation had been scandalized, and Judge Harrison had quietly suggested that Eleanor might benefit from rest and medical attention. On a particularly cold February morning, Eleanor was in Samuel's old room when she heard voices coming from the main house. She crept down the back stairs and listened from the kitchen as Mr. Briggs spoke with two men she didn't recognize. "She's gotten worse," Briggs was saying. "Yesterday I found her in the fields, digging holes with her bare hands. Said she was looking for something she'd buried. When I asked what, she just kept saying, 'Pieces of my soul.'" "How long has she been like this?" asked one of the strangers. "Started about 4 months ago, right after that preacher came with news about Samuel. She's been drinking heavily, barely eating, and she talks to herself constantly. Sometimes she has conversations with people who aren't there." Eleanor's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. These men weren't visitors. They were doctors, here to evaluate her mental state. "The family is concerned," the second man said. "Judge Harrison contacted Eleanor's cousin in Charleston. They're prepared to have her committed to the state hospital for the insane if necessary." "It might be for the best," Briggs replied sadly. "She can't continue like this, and the plantation is suffering. The workers are afraid of her, and the neighbors are talking." Eleanor backed away from the door, her heart pounding. She had to get away, had to think. She slipped out through the kitchen and made her way to the old oak grove where she and Samuel used to meet. But as she reached the trees, she stopped short. There, sitting on the fallen log where they used to talk, was Samuel. "You came," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. Samuel looked exactly as he had the day he was taken away, young, strong, wearing the white shirt she had given him. But his eyes held a sadness that seemed to encompass all the suffering of the world. "I never left," he said softly. "I've been waiting for you to see me." "I'm so sorry," Eleanor sobbed, falling to her knees. "I killed you. I sold you to save myself, and I killed you." "Eleanor," Samuel said, standing and moving toward her, "you have to stop this. You're destroying yourself." "I deserve to be destroyed. I chose my reputation over your life. And now you're choosing guilt over living," Samuel replied. "Is that what you think I would want?" Eleanor looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Look around you, Eleanor. Really look." Eleanor glanced around the grove and gasped. The trees were bare and dead, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The ground was covered with rotting leaves, and the air smelled of decay. But most disturbing of all, she could see other figures among the trees. Slaves who had died on the plantation over the years, all watching her with hollow, accusing eyes. "They're all here," Eleanor whispered. "All the people who suffered because of what this place represents." "Do you think joining them will somehow make it right?" Samuel asked. Eleanor couldn't answer. The weight of generations of suffering seemed to press down on her, making it hard to breathe. "Mrs. Whitmore," came a voice from the distance. Mr. Briggs was calling for her, probably with the doctors in tow. "They want to lock me away," Eleanor said to Samuel. "Maybe that's where you belong," he replied, but his voice had changed. It was colder now, filled with an anger she had never heard from him before. "Maybe that's what happens to white women who think they can play with black lives and walk away clean." Eleanor looked up sharply, but Samuel's face had changed too. His kind eyes were now filled with rage, and when he smiled, she could see that his teeth were stained with blood. "You sold me," he said, his voice rising. "You sold me like a piece of property, and then you have the nerve to feel sorry for yourself when I died because of your choice. Samuel, please!" "I loved you," he continued, his voice becoming a roar. "I trusted you, and you betrayed me for money and social standing. You're no different from any other slave owner. You just hid it better." Eleanor scrambled backward, terrified. This wasn't the Samuel she remembered. This was something else, something born from her guilt and self-hatred. "Mrs. Whitmore!" Briggs's voice was closer now. Eleanor turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush as branches tore at her dress and face. Behind her, she could hear Samuel's laughter, cold, bitter, and filled with the promise of eternal torment. She burst out of the grove and found herself face to face with Mr. Briggs and the two doctors. They took one look at her, wild-eyed, bleeding from scratches, her dress torn and muddy, and their expressions confirmed what she already knew. "Mrs. Whitmore," one of the doctors said gently, "we're here to help you." "He was there," Eleanor gasped, pointing back toward the grove. "Samuel was there, and he's angry. He's so angry." The doctors exchanged glances. "Mrs. Whitmore, Samuel is dead. You know that?" "No." Eleanor shook her head violently. "He's here. He's been here all along, watching me, judging me. They all are. All the slaves who died because of this place, because of people like me." "Eleanor," Mr. Briggs said softly, "there's no one there. You're sick and you need help." But Eleanor wasn't listening. She was staring at the grove, where she could see dozens of figures now, men, women, and children, all bearing the marks of their suffering, all looking at her with eyes that held centuries of pain and accusation. "I can see them," she whispered. "I can see what I've done." As the doctors moved to restrain her, Eleanor realized that her descent into madness wasn't a breakdown, it was a revelation. She was finally seeing the truth of what she had participated in, the human cost of the system that had made her wealth and comfort possible. But the truth, she discovered, was a burden too heavy for her mind to bear. As the doctors led her away from Magnolia Grove for the last time, Eleanor could still hear Samuel's voice, no longer kind, but filled with the righteous anger of the dead. "You wanted to save your reputation," he called after her. "Now live with what that choice really cost." The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to preserve her place in society, she had lost her mind. And in losing her mind, she had finally found the truth she had been running from all along. The Louisiana State Hospital for the Insane sat like a Gothic nightmare on the outskirts of New Orleans, its red brick walls and barred windows designed more to contain than to heal. Eleanor had been there for 8 months, confined to a small room with whitewashed walls that seemed to close in on her more each day. The doctors called her condition melancholia with delusions, but Eleanor knew better. She wasn't delusional. She was finally seeing clearly for the first time in her life. The problem was that clarity in her case was indistinguishable from madness. Dr. Matthias Crane, the hospital's chief physician, visited her twice weekly. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the patronizing manner of someone who believed that all female hysteria could be cured with cold baths and moral instruction. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said during one of their sessions, consulting his notes, "you've been here for over half a year now. Your cousin has written to inquire about your progress." Eleanor sat by the barred window, staring out at the hospital's courtyard, where other patients shuffled about like lost souls. "What did you tell him?" "That you continue to suffer from guilt-induced hallucinations related to your inappropriate relationship with a slave. We've discussed this before. These feelings of remorse, while understandable, have become pathological." Eleanor turned to look at him, her eyes hollow but sharp. "Pathological? Is that what you call it when someone finally understands the true cost of their actions? Mrs. Whitmore, you sold a piece of property to resolve a financial crisis. That you developed an emotional attachment to this property was unfortunate, but it doesn't make you a murderer. Property, Eleanor repeated, her voice flat. You call him property. That's what he was, legally speaking. The law is quite clear on this matter. Eleanor stood abruptly, her movements sharp and agitated. The law. Yes, let's talk about the law, Dr. Crane. The law that says a human being can be bought and sold like cattle. The law that says love between a white woman and a black man is a crime punishable by death. Tell me, doctor, what does your medical training say about laws that drive people to madness? Dr. Crane made a note in his file. Your fixation on this topic is precisely what we need to address. You must accept that your actions were legally and morally justified within the context of our society. Our society, Eleanor laughed bitterly. A society built on the backs of people we refuse to see as human. A society that taught me to value my reputation more than the life of the man I loved. Mrs. Whitmore, this self-flagellation serves no purpose. You must move forward. Move forward, Eleanor's voice rose. How does one move forward from selling their soul? That night, alone in her cell, Eleanor was visited again by Samuel, but this time he wasn't angry. He sat on the edge of her narrow bed, looking at her with the same gentle eyes she remembered from their time together. You're killing yourself with guilt, he said softly. Good, Eleanor replied. I deserve to die. Do you? Or do you deserve to live with what you've learned? Eleanor looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Eleanor, what happened to me? What you did? It's part of something much larger. You've seen the truth now, haven't you? About what this system really is, what it does to everyone trapped in it. Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face. I see them everywhere now. All the people who suffered, all the lives destroyed by people like me who were too comfortable to question what we were part of. Then don't waste that knowledge, Samuel said. Don't let my death be meaningless. But what can I do? I'm locked in here, labeled as insane. No one will listen to me. Samuel smiled sadly. Sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it takes someone who's lost everything to see what everyone else refuses to acknowledge. The next morning, Eleanor asked Dr. Crane for paper and ink. I want to write, she said. Write what? My story. The truth about what happened. Dr. Crane frowned. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not sure that's advisable. Dwelling on these events, Doctor, Eleanor interrupted, you said I need to move forward. This is how I move forward, by telling the truth about what I did and why I did it. Reluctantly, Dr. Crane provided the materials. Over the following weeks, Eleanor wrote obsessively, filling page after page with her story. She wrote about her love for Samuel, about the pressures of society that made their relationship impossible, about the choice she made and its devastating consequences. But more than that, she wrote about the system that had created the impossible situation in the first place. She wrote about the casual cruelty of slavery, about the way it corrupted everyone it touched, slave and master alike. She wrote about the lies people told themselves to justify the unjustifiable. Word of Eleanor's writings began to spread through the hospital. Some of the staff were horrified by her frank discussions of interracial love and her condemnation of slavery. Others were moved by her raw honesty and the depth of her remorse. Dr. Crane tried to confiscate the pages, but Eleanor had already given copies to other patients, to sympathetic nurses, to anyone who would take them. Her story began to circulate beyond the hospital walls, copied and passed from hand to hand. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Crane said during one of their sessions, your writings are causing quite a stir. Some very important people are concerned about the content. Concerned about the truth, you mean? Concerned about inflammatory rhetoric that could incite unrest. I've been instructed to inform you that if you continue writing such material, your treatment here may become more intensive." Eleanor understood the threat. More intensive meant isolation, cold water treatments, perhaps even the restraints and forced medications used on the hospital's most difficult patients. "Doctor," Eleanor said calmly, "I've already lost everything that mattered to me. My love, my sanity, my place in society. What more can you take? Your life, Mrs. Whitmore, make no mistake about that." That night, Eleanor sat by her window, looking out at the stars. She thought about Samuel, about the choice she had made, about the price they had both paid for a love that society deemed impossible. She thought about the other patients in the hospital, women who had been committed for everything from excessive reading to unnatural independence. She thought about the slaves still laboring in the fields, about the system that ground up human lives for profit and called it civilization. And she thought about her writings, now spreading beyond these walls, carrying with them a truth that some people desperately wanted to suppress. Eleanor realized that her madness had become her freedom. Labeled as insane, she was no longer bound by the social conventions that had once constrained her. She could speak truths that sane people dared not voice. As she picked up her pen to continue writing, Eleanor felt Samuel's presence beside her one last time. "Tell them," he whispered. "Tell them what it really costs to build a society on human bondage. Tell them what it does to everyone, the enslaved and the enslavers alike." Eleanor nodded and began to write, her words flowing like blood from a wound that would never fully heal. She wrote for Samuel, for all the unnamed dead, and for a future that might someday be different. The reckoning had begun, and Eleanor Whitmore, the mad woman in the asylum, had become its unlikely prophet. 2 years had passed since Eleanor's confinement, and her writings had taken on a life of their own. Despite Dr. Crane's efforts to suppress them, copies of her manuscript had reached abolitionists in the North, who recognized the power of a Southern white woman's testimony about the true nature of slavery. Her words were being published in underground newspapers and read at anti-slavery meetings, causing considerable alarm among Louisiana's political elite. Eleanor herself had deteriorated physically. The combination of poor hospital conditions, her refusal to eat regularly, and the constant mental anguish had left her gaunt and frail. But her mind, while fractured, remained sharp when it came to her writing. She continued to produce pages of searing testimony, each word carved from her guilt and pain. On a humid spring morning, Eleanor was informed that she had a visitor. She was led to the hospital's visiting room, where she found a woman she didn't recognize, a middle-aged black woman with intelligent eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard labor. "Mrs. Whitmore," the woman said softly, "my name is Sarah Johnson. I believe you knew my brother." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "Samuel's sister?" Sarah nodded. "I've come a long way to see you. I've read your writings, the ones that have been circulating. I needed to hear the truth from you directly." Eleanor's hands trembled as she sat across from Sarah. "I'm so sorry. I killed him. I sold your brother, and I killed him." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "You did." The blunt acknowledgement hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She had expected anger, accusations, perhaps even violence, but Sarah's calm acceptance of the truth was somehow worse. "But," Sarah continued, "I also know what Samuel wrote about you in his letters. He loved you, Mrs. Whitmore. And he understood the impossible position you were both in." Eleanor looked up, tears streaming down her face. "How can you not hate me?" "Oh, I do hate you," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "I hate what you did. I hate the choice you made, and I hate the system that made that choice seem necessary. But Samuel asked me not to hate you as a person. He said you were as much a victim of slavery as he was, just in a different way. That's not true. I had choices. I chose my reputation over his life." "Yes, you did. And that choice has destroyed you, hasn't it?" Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Sarah leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, I didn't come here for your apologies. I came because your writings are making a difference. People are reading your story and finally understanding what slavery really does, not just to the enslaved, but to everyone it touches. It doesn't bring him back. No, it doesn't. But it might prevent other Samuels from dying the same way." Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a worn letter. This is the last thing Samuel wrote before he died. The plantation owner's wife found it hidden in his quarters and gave it to the preacher who ministered to him. "I thought you should have it." With shaking hands, Eleanor took the letter and read, "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and someone has been kind enough to deliver my final words to you. I want you to know that I do not blame you for what happened. I understand why you made the choice you did, and I forgive you for it. But I need you to understand something. My death must not be in vain. You have seen the truth now, the real cost of the system we were both trapped in. You have the power to tell that truth in ways that I never could. Use it. Don't let guilt destroy you. Let it transform you. Let it make you into someone who fights against the evil we both suffered under. My love for you was real, and it was beautiful, even if the world couldn't accept it. Honor that love by making sure others know the truth. I will wait for you in whatever comes after this life, in a place where love is not constrained by the color of our skin. Forever yours, Samuel." Eleanor clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing. "He still loved me, even after what I did." "He did," Sarah confirmed. "And now you need to decide what to do with that love." After Sarah left, Eleanor sat alone in her cell, staring at Samuel's final letter. She thought about the 2 years she had spent drowning in guilt and self-hatred, about the writings that had somehow found their way into the world, despite her confinement. That evening, Dr. Crane visited her with news that would change everything. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his expression grave, "I've received word from the state authorities. Your writings have caused considerable disruption. There are calls for your transfer to a more secure facility, one where your ability to communicate with the outside world would be more strictly controlled." Eleanor looked at him calmly. "You mean they want to silence me? They want to ensure that you receive proper treatment for your condition, and if I refuse to stop writing?" Dr. Crane's expression darkened. "Then your treatment will become more intensive." "There are methods we can employ to ensure your compliance." Eleanor understood. They would drug her into compliance, or worse. Her voice would be silenced, and Samuel's death would truly be meaningless. That night, Eleanor made her final choice. She had been saving the laudanum that the hospital occasionally gave her for pain, hiding the doses instead of taking them. She had enough now to ensure that her suffering would end on her own terms. But before she took that final step, she wrote one last letter. "To whoever finds this, my name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I am dying by my own hand. Not because I am insane, as they claim, but because I am finally sane enough to see the truth of what I have done and what I have been part of. I sold the man I loved into slavery to save my reputation. He died because of my choice, and I have spent the last 2 years trying to atone for that sin through my writings. But they want to silence me now, to bury the truth along with my voice. I will not let that happen. My death will be my final testimony. Let it stand as proof of what slavery does to everyone it touches, the enslaved who suffer and die, and the enslavers who lose their humanity in the process. Samuel Johnson was a good man who deserved better than the world gave him. He loved me despite my flaws, and he forgave me despite my betrayal. I go to my death, hoping to find him again in whatever comes next, in a place where love is not a crime and human beings are not property. Remember us, remember what we suffered for, and fight to ensure that no one else pays the price we paid for a system built on human bondage." Eleanor Whitmore, April 15th, 1853. As dawn broke over the asylum, Eleanor swallowed the laudanum and lay down on her narrow bed. She thought of Samuel, of their stolen moments together, of the love they had shared despite the world's hatred. She thought of Sarah, carrying on her brother's memory with dignity and strength. She thought of her writings, spreading like seeds on the wind, carrying the truth to places where it might take root and grow. As the drug took hold, Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't known since the day Samuel was taken away. She had finally found a way to honor his memory, to transform her guilt into something meaningful. The mad woman in the asylum had spoken her truth, and no amount of suppression could silence it now. Her story would outlive her, a testament to the human cost of a system that treated people as property and love as a crime. In her final moments, Eleanor Whitmore believed she could see Samuel waiting for her, his hand extended, ready to lead her to a place where their love could finally exist without shame or fear. The plantation widow who had sold her slave lover to escape scandal had found her redemption at last, not in forgiveness, but in truth, and that truth, born from the ashes of their impossible love, would continue to burn long after she was gone.